everyone, and welcome back to the GaimhSA podcast. Today we have with us Associate Professor Campbell Paul. Campbell Paul is a consultant infant psychiatrist at the Royal Children's and Royal Women's Hospitals in Melbourne. He's also an honorary principal fellow in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Melbourne. With colleagues at the University of Melbourne, he has established and delivered postgraduate courses in infant and parent mental health since 1992. These courses developed out of a long-standing experience in pediatric consultation, liaison psychiatry, and infant-parent psychotherapy. He has a special interest in the understanding of the inner world of the baby, particularly as it informs therapeutic work with infants and their parents. With colleagues, he has developed models of working in therapeutic groups with troubled parents and infants. And very excitingly, he is president-elect of the World Association for Infant Mental Health, our, what do you call it?
International home for...
The international home to which GaimhSA belongs. And in addition, Campbell Paul is the director of the Australian Training Centre for the NBO at the Royal Women's Hospital in Melbourne. And through engaging the baby, the NBO provides a powerful intervention to support the developing infant-parent relationship. So thank you, Campbell, very much for taking the time to do this podcast for us at GaimhSA, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Nicki.
So I was hoping that today we could start off talking a little bit about the World Association for Infant Mental Health, and maybe you could start by sharing with us a little bit about its history and how it came to be.
Yeah, well, infant mental health is a relatively new discipline in a formed sense of discipline. Although there obviously people have been interested in babies and their emotional world and relationships for a long time. People like Renee Spitz from Austria and then in the States, observing babies, Winnicott and Melanie Klein looking at the inner world of children, Bowlby and his approach to understanding the evolution of attachment and the relationship between infants and caregivers. So there's a long history of interest in babies and their care and their relationships and early development. But as a formal body, Waimh emerged at the biennial Infant Mental Health Congress in Chicago, when there was a joint coming together of the International Association for Infant Mental Health, which was very much community research-oriented organisation that had been going for some time, particularly in the States, and WAPAD, which had been running for some time in Europe and the States as well, the UK. WAPAD was the World Association for Infant Psychiatry and Allied Professions, and there were many mental health professionals there, but with a strong interest in psychodynamic and psychoanalytic understandings of the baby. People like Serge Lebovici, who was a real pioneer in infant psychiatry, infant mental health, a psychoanalyst from Paris, was one of the founders of WAPAD. And the Infant Mental Health Association, one of the key people was Hiram Fitzgerald, and it was, I think, a very wise move to combine the two organisations. And I think it's created a really welcoming, very multidisciplinary organisation that's open to a whole range of different ways of thinking about babies, toddlers, preschoolers and their parents and their relationships. I first went to a Waimh conference, it was a WAPAD conference in Lugano in Switzerland, and was struck by the excitement and the friendliness and the openness of everyone who was there. Daniel Stern was one of the presenters, as was a colleague of his from from the east coast of the States, and there was a really vigorous debate, which I found really very stimulating, about when can you know that a young child is able to think about themselves as a person, think about themselves as me or I. And I remember Michael Lewis saying, well, there's not much difference between the human infant up until about 8 months and a rat pup.
Sure.
He was being really very cheeky and provocative and playful, but his view was that it was at that point you could identify the child identifying themselves as a person.
So at 8 months?
18 months.
At 18 months. Wow.
So he was using the Rouge test as his indicator that 18-month-old looking in a mirror where you've previously put a spot of red lipstick or rouge on the toddler's forehead, looks in the mirror and is a bit intrigued, and then at around that age, rather than trying to touch the image in the mirror, they'll touch their own forehead, trying to wipe the rouge off their forehead. So that's me in the mirror, and I know it's me because here I am. And Dan Stern had some very contrary views about when we can identify that the child is aware of themselves as me. And that's certainly a process that's intrigued me and grabbed my attention all along. I mean, my work has been predominantly in the context of paediatric hospital consultation liaison infant mental health, which is a bit sort of specific.
It's quite wordy, that, hey?
But basically working with infants and young children in hospital or who have medical or developmental problems coming to and from the hospital, and their nursing, medical, physio, speech, OT. So we're working in a really vibrant, multi-disciplinary context. And that's always been very enriching for me. And I think that represents something of Waimh, that all those disciplines are very welcome and contribute equally to the way that we understand the problems facing infants and young children and their parents, research how development might work, but also in particular develop programs and interventions that can be evaluated and reproduced and used. So the biennial conferences now, one of the problems is that they're so popular. We're trying to work out ways of ensuring that people have got a chance to think about the richness of the material that gets presented. And certainly in Rome it was very exciting, and lots of different aspects of infant mental health presented and discussed. The next Congress will be in Brisbane in early June 2020, and we'll have a similar problem, I think, is how to accommodate the richness of research and clinical things that people want to talk about and share.
That was last year in Rome.
Last year in Rome, yeah.
And just back to that conference that you were at, where this man made this controversial statement, was Dan Stern there in the same room?
It was a plenary discussion.
Okay. Was he on the plenary?
Yeah. They sort of had a debate, if you like, and it was very lively, and I think that was really representative of the quality of thinking and exploration that was going on, and still does. Since then, there's been a huge explosion in the understanding of the neurobiological development and the whole issue of mirror neurons and epigenetics, and how the environment and genes interplay, and how our relationships and our sense of self is a function of what we've endowed with, but even that is subject to being modified by what happens in our care and in our relationships.
Yeah. Did Daniel Stern convince him? Did he say it was Michael Lewis?
Yeah, Michael Lewis. That's a while ago now. I think the debate continued, but I think they were each coming from slightly different perspectives. And Dan Stern certainly had a powerful way of speaking the voice of the infant. I was mentioning today his book, Diary of a Baby, is quite an impressive book, a small book.
Yeah.
But in that he uses a very poetic but powerful voice as he uses the first person to get across something of the very young child, the infant, their experience and relationship. And the chapters follow key sort of developmental phases. So he draws on some of his own experience as he remembers it of a child, because he had prolonged hospitalisation when he was little, and psychoanalytic theory, but also understandings from psychoanalytic treatments of his own patients and of approach to children. And of course, he also draws on the literature around experimental research into what babies can do and think, and their moral reasoning. And that area is really very exciting and always comes up in the Waimh Congress, just how babies and very young children can have a moral sense.
Yeah.
How they're always trying to read the mind of the other. I mean, we talk about mentalisation as an important component of good parenting, but we see the babies as being capable of mentalising as well, of thinking about what's going on in the other person's mind and trying to read their own carers and other people's wishes and desires, intentions as they relate to them.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's something that's so beautiful about the newborn behavioural observation system, is that it really is curious about what's in a baby's mind and about showing that a baby has things in their mind too.
Absolutely.
And maybe you can share with our audience a little bit about what is the newborn behavioural observation.
Yeah, the NBO, the newborn behavioural observation, is a method of sharing with parents and also other carers and people who are in relationship with babies, sharing with them the baby's capacities for self-regulation, for experiencing the world around them, experiencing communication and initiating communication through their gaze, their voice, the way they use their body with their carers and with others. So it's really a relationship building tool, and the person who gives us the most information about that is the baby themselves. So it's a way of observing and handling the baby with the parents to increase the awareness and share the awareness of what the baby's capable of thinking and feeling and doing and regulating of themselves. We find it's really a very powerful tool and a very simple tool in a way, although it does take quite a step to move from thinking about the baby to thinking with and experiencing along with the baby. Getting inside the baby's shoes, I think, is what the NBO helps us, inside their skin and their mind, and then sharing that with parents. Sometimes parents are way ahead of us in respect of their baby, and there are even young parents can have a very strong intuitive understanding of what their baby's wishes and capacities are. But sometimes relatively simple things and sometimes really painful things can get in the way of that parent's capacity to understand their baby. And we think the NBO can be really helpful in breaking those disconnects if they're there.
I mean, I think that the NBO is one of the really useful things to kind of... The NBO is really helpful in, as you say, kind of getting into the skin of the baby. And I think that really speaks to what I've come to understand is really your philosophy in terms of infant mental health work, that you are really interested in working directly with babies and understanding babies. And that for you, infant mental health is not about working just with parents to help them parent, but working with babies directly as well. And maybe could you share a little bit about that and how you, why that is and how that is?
Certainly that's my passion, seeing the baby as a person in their own right, someone you can engage and talk with. But, of course, that only happens in the context of the relationship with the parents. Often people will say, well, it's not your baby. You need to step back and you haven't got the right to intrude on a relationship as intimate as the infant-parent one. But I don't really agree with that. I think parents are generally very pleased and understanding, and I think can gain a lot. And I think evince a lot of pride when they see their baby having an in-depth conversation with a respectful stranger. I think that's a sign of a very positive, healthy infant-parent relationship when the parent says, this is my baby, but he's an individual in his own right, and I respect, and in fact I encourage him to make relationships with other people, knowing that their relationship with me, the parent, is the secure base on which they're able to do that. And even when parents are aware the secure base is not there, so you've got a parent who's depressed or even a parent with a major psychotic illness, when they see their baby being respectfully engaged, I think it's quite a relief, as if to say, well, I'm really struggling. I don't know that I can really meet all of my baby's needs in terms of relationship and understanding and regulation of their inner world and their experience. But at least I know that my baby's got the capacity to do that with other people. And then giving the parent the confidence, the understanding that their baby's got these capacities, gives them time to recover as well from their depression or whatever other set of predicaments they might find themselves in. And sometimes that incapacity to connect and understand your own baby can occur in the absence of major mental illness. It can be sometimes what might look to other people to be relatively benign or subtle internal conflicts and distress that can get in the way of that comfortable relationship with the baby. You don't have to be crazy to have a significant problem sometimes with understanding and being with your baby.
I really love that idea that even though the parent-infant relationship is so important and so significant, and that even though a baby may have a real preference for their primary caregiver, that doesn't exclude the fact that they may also be really interested and curious in other people. I really love that idea that kind of those are not mutually exclusive ideas, that because attachment and because infant caregiver relationships are so precious and important, that other relationships are not of interest to a newborn or to a small baby.
We often forget that the attachment relationship is there. If you're arguing from a teleological sort of angle, the purpose of the attachment relationship is in order to provide a safe place for the child to go out into the world, not to be entrapped in an inward-looking relationship. But the secure place is necessary. And if a parent's not able to provide that, then it's our job to try and help. And sometimes it can't happen quickly, so you need to support the child in other ways to feel secure while their parents might recover, or you help rebuild that relationship.
I love that idea of a respectful stranger, that although we're not the familiar caregiver, we can, and although we might be a stranger, that we can be respectful and still engage. Yeah.
I mean, one of the discussions we have is whether a baby is able to form a transference relationship, if you're wanting to use technically sort of terms. Is the baby able to work out who you are? And it's fascinating. It comes up in lots of situations for me. I remember getting on the metro in Paris, a crowded train, and there was a mother with her baby in the stroller, probably around 13 or 14 months old, and you can't move anywhere because it's packed, and there I am face to face with this baby in the stroller. What do? Do you look at the roof, or do you talk to the baby? And even in that situation, you could see that she was looking to me, and just through her facial expressions, maybe some very soft vocalisations, she was making a connection, and vice versa. So there was an awareness in my mind that there was things going on in her mind about who is this person, what's going on, why are you looking at me, what's going on. But it was a meaningful interaction as far as I could see, even though it was very, very brief. And I think in our clinical work we shouldn't underestimate the fact that sometimes a very brief intervention can help set the baby's sense of who they are and of their relationships off in a completely different trajectory, different direction. We're quite keen about thinking of the baby as the therapist as well. So if you can help the baby, the toddler, enliven a sad or despondent parent, it can make a huge difference, because you've got a person there sort of 24 hours a day, if you like. If they're able to reflect back a sense of liveliness and awareness to the parent who's depressed or withdrawn, then you've got the potential for a very powerful therapeutic interaction arising from the baby.
So would you say that there is a transference relationship between babies and
I think so.
therapists?
Babies can form connections, and I remember there's a little girl who I've seen with her parents. She's been very sick and on high levels of oxygen and requiring lots of medical treatment, and I've visited her 2 or 3 times a week and talked with her and with her parents, and people weren't sure whether the illness, the physiological problems had made it difficult for her to have the sort of general developmental capacity to engage. But her parents were quite convinced that when they looked at her, she looked at them back and held their gaze. When they gave her a bath, she was very comfortable, and her mood changed. I think the same happened with me to a lesser degree. But if I approached her and talked to her, she would flick her gaze across, hold my gaze for a moment, then look away. Then she'd come back. If I was still there, she'd hold my gaze for longer and longer. And then on a number of occasions there was just a very real but subtle smile as well. So despite the predicament that she was in from a physical, medical point of view, she was able to differentiate the quality of interaction with the people who were coming in contact with her parents, of course, who were able to work through some of their sort of distress and grief, but also, a stranger who was there able to meet them where they were. So I think using one understanding of the word transference, I think, can develop between the baby and the therapist.
And maybe coming back to the World Association for Infant Mental Health, where is it headed? What's coming up for it? You mentioned the conference already that's going to be happening in Brisbane. Maybe you can tell us a bit about what's going to be happening at the conference and in the association more generally.
So the Congress next year, June 2020, will be in Brisbane in Australia, and a key component of the theme of the Congress is that about narrative stories, understanding the evolution of the baby, the parent, the toddler's experience. It'll be an all-encompassing conference, but because it's in Australia, we're very keen to honour the Indigenous people of Australia and other parts of the world as well. So we're hoping that there'll be a strong theme around the experience of Indigenous peoples, their babies, and the struggles and difficulties, and how we can, as professionals, work alongside families and communities to improve things. One of the keynote speakers is Helen Milroy, who's an Aboriginal psychiatrist and also been a Royal Commissioner inquiring into institutional abuse of children. So that'll be a really powerful talk, and also indicates the interest from the program committee in helping children in experiencing trauma of a whole range of different sorts. How do we understand the baby, the toddler's experience of trauma, and what's the best way we can respond and help them and their parents? So trauma, narrative, and because of the nature of Waimh, we're interested in everyone's experience, and there'll be an opportunity to talk about things. I'm here at Uber Bailey at the moment, and I'm really impressed with the power of very creative programs, home visiting with lay women who are trained and supported to work with families in sometimes the most dire of situations, and also providing access to really high quality, powerful psychotherapeutic interventions, all happening in the middle of a country where there's been huge social upheaval and major pressures. So I know that there are really powerful, creative approaches to working with very vulnerable families and their children. We look forward to hearing from other people as well as the Uber Bailey team in Brisbane. I was just thinking that one of the key tasks for Waimh as an organisation now, I think, is how to get the message out to the communities where we all live in as comprehensive and as powerful a sort of way. I'm going back to thinking about Winnicott in the period after the Second World War, and there'd been so much carnage and disruption and children losing families and parents, children dying. But the Home Office asked Winnicott to prepare a series of talks to parents about their capacity to know and help their infants and young children. And I think we're still at that point where we need to be able to get broadcasts of one kind or another, maybe using modern media, out to parents that they do often have a deeper understanding and capacity to help their infants than they might think, and we've got ways of helping them do that. So to get the message of infant mental health out to as many parents and professional groups and community groups as we can.
It's very exciting because it's kind of speaks to two functions. Hey, the conference bringing the professionals already convinced together and sharing important knowledge, and then the other important function of advocating and sharing the news with those who aren't yet aware of just how social.
Influencing policy makers and people who are going to provide resources to improve things for infants and families. That's a key function of all of that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk, especially to our colleagues, friends and people who are listening in South Africa and hopefully beyond.
Yeah, we hope that our Gauteng network will share this far and wide, and it's certainly not meant to stay just within the association, so hopefully many people will get to hear this. Thank you so very much for your time, and it's been really lovely to chat to you.
Thanks very much, Nicki, and thanks to Gauteng Infant Mental Health Association.